In this video, we're going to be looking at how to walk you through the PI planning event itself. More specifically, we're going to be looking at the step-by-step approach for the team planning portion of the PI planning event. We're going to look at our Justice Inc. example, that legal digital publisher that is using PI planning to plan its next quarter. So let's have a look at that. Hey friends, I'm Ahmed, a skilled agile and productivity coach based in the UK. On this channel, we cover productivity, agility, and joy. And as I said, we're going to look at the PI planning event itself. So if we look at the screen, what you're going to see is the agenda. We're assuming a 2-day agenda over here. Now, nowadays, what I find is that some organizations do 2 days, some organizations even do 3 days due to the remote planning situation that we have during the COVID period. But effectively, what you have is you might have a variation of 2 or 3 days. Sometimes, in some cases, I also see running as 1-day events as well. But typically, is a 2 days, so that's what we're going for in this example. So when we start off before the business context and the vision. It's nice to just kick off a little bit, have a little bit of a coffee, have an icebreaker, get together, do a little bit of socializing, whether that's remotely or whether that's in-person event. That's always nice to have, to try and create that camaraderie. I mean, after all, that's what it's about, really. You know, it's like trying to bring everybody together. You have this event where people have this opportunity to actually come together. Maybe it could be after quite a long time. Sometimes it may be a situation where people haven't actually seen or met each other for a long time. And so it's that opportunity to actually get together. Now, straight after that, we've got the business context and the vision. This is where we outline what the overall goals are, what the vision is. We can walk through what our we can walk through the feature, the roadmap, the architectural practices, and the planning guidelines. After that, you'd probably want a little bit of a break just so people can get started, and then you jump straight into the team planning, which we're going to talk about more during this session. Another break with lunch, and then follow on with team planning 2 as well. And you can see on your screen the different stages in there, which we're going to go through in detail now in this video. After that, we have a draft plan review where all of the teams actually go and they actually show everybody in the environment all what they have planned during that day. And at the end of the day, what we have is what's called a management review and problem solving workshop. So there you have an opportunity for the management to come together to actually have a look and see how the teams have actually done. Do they have any concerns? Are they all the goals look like they're likely to be met? Are there any adjustments that they wish to make? And if so, then that can inform the day 2 agenda, which is on your screen. Again, probably start off good to have a little bit of networking, get a little bit of fun going over there, a little bit of coffee, virtual or in person, whatever the situation is. And then any planning adjustments you might have, those come in followed on with closing off your planning that you might have. You want to do any final adjustments that you have. You want to make sure you complete now. You're going to be focusing more on the dependencies, the cross-planning, putting the dependency board together, finalizing any risks and impediments that you have, and putting together those program objectives and getting all of your team sheets ready. After lunch, then you'll have a final plan review where you review all of the great stuff that you've put for that exciting PI that's about to come. You have a look at bringing all of the program level risks. You'll discuss those. Confidence vote to see how much confidence you have in that, and at the end you might have a retrospective. All of these things we're going to be covering in future videos. So let's get started with the first session. Okay, so we're going to be looking at Justice Inc. as an example for the first slot. So let's have a look and see what we've got. Reminder, we've got a vision. What was that vision? It was to be the Earth's most reliable store of legal information, the first place where legal professionals around the globe go to obtain the latest legal information on any topic. Then we might want to outline our goal, which is for lawyers and legal practitioners who practice law in Australia. The awesome Aussie case law system is a provider of Australian case law information that assists lawyers to provide legal services to their customers. Unlike the current situation where lawyers must consult legal books and so on and so forth. So you run them through whatever the key goals are. And over here, as I said, you might want to use an epic structure, or you might use a simple structure as well. Whatever it is, remind people what is the overall objectives and what is the goals of your PI planning. Now, The problem with that goal is it's too big. How do we split that up? So in this case, we split it up into 3 different functional features and 1 enabler, but those are too big. So effectively what we're bringing into this PI planning is 5 features that you could see on your screen over there. And you've got 2 enablers that are represented in the red, and you've got 3 functional features that are represented in the blue. So we want to clarify what we have going in. We've got the cloud infrastructure setup, which is about setting up the overall infrastructure across for the whole system that we have. We have the family court system integration, which is to do with linking the family court system to our systems. We've got the family law divorce feature, which is around grabbing all of the Australian case law from 1912 for divorces. You've got the criminal law, again, all of that information from there, as well as the corporate law from the Supreme Court, linking in with the Supreme Court systems to get that information. Another thing I find really useful is to show a roadmap so that people can get an idea of where the PI fits in the wider picture. So if you look on the screen, what you'll see over here, you can see an example of our PI. Here are our 5 features. These are the ones being brought into the current PI. How does that fit into the wider scheme of things? We don't know whether those are all going to be done. Let's assume that they are. If they are, then this is what the roadmap actually looks like. If it's not, then we'll adjust and update the roadmap at the end of the PI planning event. Okay, so now we've brought in our prioritized and ordered features, the 5 features that we've brought into this session, and we've walked everybody through our vision, through our goals, through our features, through our roadmap as well. And now we want to look and explain to them, how does the overall architecture fit into the wider scheme of things? Now, in this specific instance, we've happened to have an enabler feature. But look, on the screen, it's very simple, very straightforward, just an outline in terms of what it is we are actually doing. Again, we're not trying to give enough information so that they can actually build anything, but we're trying to give broad brush, high level overview so people can actually get an understand of the overall strategy. The details will come during PI planning a little bit, and then the rest of it will be done during the sprint planning and the rest of the sprints as well as they go along when you're actually building and doing the detailed designs and other things as well. But we can see we're looking for a cloud infrastructure setup. So there are a number of elements over here. They're all cloud specific elements. And this is how we think they would actually all fit together. Similarly, when we're looking at the family court system integration, we're looking at the communication that's going to go between the different components. And you can see the family court systems on one place, you can see our systems on the other, and you can see how the different services, they link and they talk to one another. So that's the kind of level that I'd be expecting to be happening at this stage. Further on details and other things, you can come afterwards. Again, remember, this is a high level planning. We don't want to get stuck into too many details. A common anti-pattern I see is that everybody tries to understand everything up front. That's not the intent of the PI planning. You're trying to get an overall picture. You're trying to thrash out the major impediments. You're trying to thrash out the dependencies across the different teams and across the different functions. But what you're not trying to do is solve every single problem that you have. So that's something to bear in mind. All right, and then I find it useful to have some planning guidelines, especially, when you've got either a new Agile release train, or you've got even a train that's been around for a while, especially if you've got a lot of churn going on, a lot of new people coming in. Always very helpful to walk through the planning guidelines. So effectively, it's pretty much what I'm going to be walking you through now. So the first thing we've got to talk about is team planning 1, and we want to look at how do we determine what is the team capacity. So let's have a look at the 2 ways in which we would need to potentially do that. So the first way is if you have a team that has been, or an Agile release train that has been there for a while, then you don't need to do anything too fancy. Just have a look at their previous history, see how they've done. On the screen, you can see an example of a team over here. They've got between 20 story points all the way up to 40 story points. But if we look at it, it looks like sprint 1 is a little bit of an outlier. Maybe they were just starting out. Maybe there was, a major incident that happened, or maybe there was a holiday, a religious festival or something that occurred that resulted in that. We want to find out what that is. In this case, we'll probably just exclude that. That might be the case, especially if it's a outlying event that occurred. So maybe for this case, if you had something like this, you might say you have, say, 35 story points as a kind of rough indicative kind of capacity to go through. On a good sprint, we've done 40. On a kind of like a poorer sprint, we've done 30. So maybe then 35 odd would be a reasonable assumption to go with a team such as this. On the other hand, but what happens if we've got a newly formed team, right? So, well, what Scaled Agile actually recommends is, I think it's 7 story points or 8. I typically use 8 myself. 8 story points per person for those people that are actually working to get the stories done. So we're not including the Scrum Masters, the product owners, the business analysts, or anybody like that that may not actually be actively contributing towards the actual user story itself. Now, this is going to give you average velocity. Let me give you an example. Let's just say we've got 5 developers or testers, you've got a Scrum Master, you've got product owners, so that's a team of 7. But then what we actually work out for this team, we say 5 times 8, which is 40. And so then you've got your 40 story points for that sprint. And if you've got a sprint of, say, if you've got a PI of, say, 12 weeks, then you've got 5 sprints and 1 innovation and planning sprint, which we don't necessarily count. So it'll be 40 times 5, so 200 story points for that program increment. So now the first step is now done. So the team should either, hopefully they would know this before they're coming into the PI planning event, or they can quickly work it out if they don't. Step number 2, they need to identify the features. Now the features, we should be walking in with a program backlog. We should also be walking with a feature team matrix. If you don't know what that is, please click on the link over here or in the description below, depending upon where you're watching this video, because I find this very useful. On the screen, what you'll see is an example of one we're using for Justice Inc. You can see the 3 teams we have in Justice Inc. You can see the 5 different features that are brought into this PI planning event, and you can see the representation of the features against the different teams as well. So let's just take an example of the pair team, okay? And let's have a look and see if I'm part of the pair team, then which features do I need to work on or contribute towards? So the first one is the cloud infrastructure setup. Second one is the family law, divorce cases, and the third one is criminal law. So we've got these 3, but for this specific example, we're only going to be covering the 2, which you should get an idea of how to do things. And the third thing we want to look at, once we've identified our features, we then want to say, okay, we've identified our features. We said we're going to pick on 2 of those for this example. So the first one is the cloud infrastructure setup, and then the second one is the family law divorce feature. So we've selected these 2 features. Now, how do we break down these features into story placeholders? Okay, so I call them story placeholders just to signify they're not fully formed user stories. So let's just have a look and see what is the difference between a user story and a story placeholder. Okay, so what is a story placeholder? Very simply, it's just a title or very short description for the purposes of PI planning. We don't need to create fully formed user stories. These can be done before each sprint planning. So frequently I see a common anti-pattern when new teams come in. They're arguing around minutiae and little details and not necessary for PI planning. You can do that during your sprint planning. You can even do that later on during the sprint as you are working through the details. So let's have a look at the screen as an example. Let's just say we have got a online registration over here. A user story. On here you can see the different details for the user story. As an online customer, I want to register my details online so that I only have to enter my details once, and then you have your acceptance criteria over there. Right, now on that, for taking that as an example, we wouldn't need to bring in all of that information. All we would put is online customer registration, bang, put it on a post-it note, story placeholder, you're done. All right, so really simple, really straightforward. Just knock something out. You can even change it afterwards. You've got a placeholder there. You understand and clear on what you're talking about, roughly what the scope of it is, and then you can actually move on. So the first step that we want to do then is we want to take our feature over here and we want to break this down into story placeholders. So let me show you an example of each of these features one by one. So let's look at the enabler example first. The enabler details are on the screen in front of you. Let's have a look and see how we've broken those down into the user stories. Okay, so we've looked at our cloud infrastructure setup. We looked at the success criteria, and based upon that, and also the benefit hypothesis and the discussion that we had with our product owner, the whole team came up with, and they broke up certain things. So let's just have a look and see what we have done. We've translated this large feature that you see on the screen into what you see over here on the board. So let's have a look and see what we've got in no particular order. We could see over here, we need to evaluate what the different cloud options could be. We need to see, make sure we make the right decisions around that. We might need to know what our encryption strategy is going to be as well. So there's another spike, which is also known as investigation, to know what we want to do around that. We want to make sure that we've set up our cloud servers. Obviously, we want to make sure that we've got our data integration points. So we've got 3 user stories over here to cover off our different data integration points over here as well. Okay. We've also got some acceptance criteria over here that actually says, which is non-functional, which says it needs to be scalable. So we need to make sure whatever options we choose, that's going to impact the evaluating the cloud options. So we need to bear that in mind as well. No need to separate it, have something separate for that, but that's basically how we would do. Okay, so that is in red because those are enablers. Let's go and have a look and see how we split out the features for our family law divorce. And let's have a look and see what that actually looks like. Okay, so again, in a similar way, we've got a certain number of success criteria that we need to match. We've got, we need to make sure that the relevant information is available. We want to make sure that all the information from 1912 is available. We want to make sure that lawyers can opt in for commentary, and we want to make sure that they can subscribe to different services as well. So there are a bunch of different things we need to do. So we split them out. We've said, okay, we need to be able to obtain the current divorce case data that's currently available. We've assumed over here that basically the older information that's older than 1930, this is an archive, so that basically there's a different approach for us to use that. So we've split those out. We have got a user story which shows how we're going to view, and we want to be able to search that. Could be a simple search. We've got a subscription service story, and we've got an opt-in, opt-out commentary. Okay, so now in that way, really quickly, it shouldn't take really that long to be able to do this. Now, some teams I see, they might do this in advance, i.e. they may come in before PI planning, and they may actually do this before they come into PI planning event. Now, if you think about this, the PI planning event is really that part. The purpose of the PI planning event is that all the teams can come together and they can actually share ideas and have an exchange of ideas, okay? But the first portion of it is really a little bit around where the team actually gets and works out what they actually need to do. I personally have no objection when I'm coaching my teams if a team says they want to do the first part of the planning themselves. I have no objection to that. It can just speed things up because there's not a lot of cross-team interaction happening on team planning 1. So that's perfectly acceptable approach. Okay, so now you should hopefully, by the end of team planning 1, ideally, you should have had that done by about lunchtime. Now, some teams, especially if they're new, they've got a large number of features, they've got a large number of work, may take longer than just a single session to do it. And that's why I frequently give teams an opportunity to continue doing that in the second session as well. What you will find is some teams will need it and other teams will not, and that's all good, and that's to be expected as well. Now, one thing also that is very useful is to have a Scrum of Scrums where all of the Scrum Masters come together, and you might want to do that prior to your lunch. So you have a Scrum of Scrums where you call all of the Scrum Masters from the different teams doing your PI planning, you bring them together, and then basically they can give an update in terms of how they are doing and I frequently might have a checklist to see how they're doing. So for example, the checklist may be, have you determined your team capacity, yes or no? Have you been able to identify your features in this case? Have you started to break down your features into story placeholders? Do you have any impediments or other things that you would raise from a planning point of view, not generally, but from a planning point of view, or do you need any help from any other individual? And those are the kind of questions that I would expect to come up during your Scrum of Scrums for your Scrum Masters. And typically if you give 15 minutes before lunch, just ask the Scrum Masters to come in. I would warn them in advance so that they know that that is the case as well. Okay, so then after lunch, as I said, you've got your team planning too. Some teams may continue doing their feature breakdown into their story placeholders. Other teams may already be done. Once we've done that, once we've broken down the features into story placeholders, we then need to size them. So a quick way that I like to do it during PI planning is just using a t-shirt sizing approach, small, medium and large. Just keep it really simple, and you want to fly through these really quickly because pace is quite important. We're not looking at sort of detail at PI planning. We're looking at trying to get an overall view and a picture. So getting an idea of that is the most important thing, rather than delving too much on minutiae, and that's something just to be a little bit warned about. So for example, all you would then do is you'd say, okay, over here I've got small, medium, large, you've got 3 different buckets. What you would want to do is then with the team, you take one, you talk about that, and you say, okay, evaluating the cloud options as an example, how long is that going to be? Is that going to be, is that one of your smallest one, or is that one of your largest? You'd say, well, it's kind of a middle one. So you say, okay, if that's middle, then put that over there. What would be smaller than that? You say, well, we think that the encryption strategy should be fairly small, should be the smallest thing over here. Okay, what about the data integration? We think that's going to be tricky, for example. So we'll put these as large. So you can do that over there like that. Okay, and then setting up the cloud servers, we'll say, okay, that's another large as well. So what you end up with then is you have a very quick way of doing your sizing. We could do the sizing over here on the other side as well. So let's just say, for example, these end up like here with some discussion. And so, for example, the search, I might say that's a little bit on the large side, and obtaining the archive data is probably on this, and doing the normal data would be on the medium side. So if we have something like that, now in a really quick way, in not too long, you should be able to size them. You don't want to be getting to long debates. And if you end up in the debate and some are saying it's small and others are saying it's medium, just say, okay, if you're a Scrum Master, just say, okay, let's go with medium, put it down there, and let's move on. Because it's not worth that level of discussion. We're looking for order of magnitude sizing over here. So if there's like if you've got a schism between the two and someone saying small is medium, just go with the pessimistic outlook, and I personally would just move on. You don't want to spend too much time on it. Okay, so then the thing that I find really useful to do is that you want to mark the stories, because once you've got them in the different buckets and you start to put them onto your team board over here, which I've kind of represented, this is iteration 1, 2, 3, 4, you then don't lose that information. So let's quickly do that. Okay, so for small, I've given a 1, and for medium, I've given a 3, and for large, I've given a 5. And the reason for that is because we want to be able to add these up and make sure that we don't over allocate work to any one iteration or sprint. So let's just say, for argument's sake, if this team has got, we ended up with, we're doing this for the first time, we've got 5 team members, so we agree that this has got a 40 story point capacity. So we've got 40 story point capacity for each of these. But one of the things that we know is that we want our plan to be emergent, which means that we want to load up less and less as we progress and get further away from where we are, because we want to have that ability to be able to swap things in, change a few things if needed, depending upon the situation or changing conditions as well. So for example, in the first iteration, we might say we only want to load up, say, 90%. So 90% of 36 is, we probably want to load up, say, 36 story points over here. If, for example, we said in the second one we'd want to load up, say, 80% for argument's sake, then that would be 32. Let's just say another 32, and let's just say 30 over here for that. So we'll just do 4 for argument's sake over here. And then what we'll do is, all we then need to do is we need to work out then in which order, depending upon what is the priority of the features and the goals and the vision that you've actually got, what you need to do. And that's where your product owner should be able to help you. Your product owner should have got that information from the product manager before coming in, and then they basically should be able to allocate it. And then, for example, then it's just as simple as working out just allocating them to the different sprints and iterations. So let's just do that really quickly over here. So we know that we've got to do the infrastructure. We've got to set up the infrastructure first for us to be able to actually build the actual feature on top of that. So that's why we can see the enablers that are in red. And sometimes in new teams, you would actually find a large percentage of your earlier sprints are filled up with enablers because you're actually building out the infrastructure, and that's entirely to be expected. So let's have a look at that. We need to work out what kind of cloud infrastructure we need to do. So we'll put that first over there. We would probably want to make sure that we've got our family law data integration as well. Above that, we want to have our clouds server, set up our cloud server. So a lot of these enabler things are kind of can be supported by your architects as well, to help inform the teams and the product owners in terms of what order these things need to be done. While your product owner may not know specifically if he or she is not architecturally savvy over there, so they can pull on that information from over there. And then, for example, we've got family law, and then we would say, okay, let's do that. Let's do the encryption strategy. And then on top of that, we might want to obtain just a basic data in the first sprint. Okay. So now in that way, we've got a bunch of stories over here that we have loaded up. We can load up a bunch of others. I'm just going to load these up. Hopefully you get the idea. Okay. So now what we have got is we have now got the team that have actually planned the work that they need to do. So at the end of the draft, at the end of team planning 2, the team now should be in a position where they can actually show what their plan is. Now remember one thing, this is just a team pair now doing their planning. So the problem is now that there could be lots of dependencies on team pair that have not been brought into consideration at all. Okay, and that's what the follow-on sessions are going to be, especially in day 2, is where we actually start to bring that. Now, is this plan likely to change? It's quite possible that it will change. I'll need to move some stories backwards and forwards. Requests are going to come in to team pair for them to do work for other teams. Certain things that team pair are working on may need to be done sooner than others, so there may be some shifting of priority that needs to happen. All of this is part of the negotiation that happens on day 2. So at the end of day 1, we'd show them this. We'd also show potentially some other sheets. We'd also show in terms of the some risks that we might have, some impediments that we might have as well. And then also we might have some goals and other things. But remember, these are going to be very much draft until we get all of the demands from the other teams through as well. Okay, so this is the first 2 planning sessions where we should land over here. And then we present this to the wider group in the draft plan management review. And then at the end of the day, as I said, we would have a management review and a problem solving session. And in this way, we cover off and finish a day 1 agenda. And basically the follow-on day 2, where we end up with is we end up, as I said, looking at the overall cross dependencies. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. We've covered off day 1 of the PI planning event. In the next video, we're going to be covering off more on day 2 and how we complete our planning, and we'll do the program dependency board, and we'll take some examples of how we manage cross-team dependencies, and we'll look at how we bring all of the different inputs together and what are all of the outputs that actually come from PI planning, so that we are really clear on exactly what we need to do for the upcoming quarter. All right, so I hope you find that useful and look forward to seeing you in the next video. If you've not subscribed, then please consider subscribing to this channel where we talk about PI planning. I will be bringing in my book club series pretty shortly as well over the coming weeks, and apologies for being away. I had a lot of stuff going on at the moment and a few shifts in priorities as well, but we're back in the game, and look forward to seeing you next week now with the next video. Take care and look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.